These are notes number 7, your first set of notes for this week. It is 11-7, page 685 in your book. Definitely look in your book and look at the examples and try to follow along. This all should be set up already from the beginning of class. So if you need it, pause the video. Otherwise, we are going to get started. So start copying this down. We are going to be factoring today, but special kinds of factoring, special cases. So this first case, this first kind, go ahead and copy this all down. You must recognize perfect square trinomials. Perfect square trinomials factor to be a perfect square. Those ones, remember the a plus b squared or the a minus b squared. So this is how you will recognize them. You must recognize perfect square trinomials. Again, pause if you want to pause. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. But it all has to be written down. So what you check for is that the first and last terms of the trinomial, they have to be perfect squares. And then the other thing, you have to check all of this, okay? The middle term has to be 2 times the first and last terms, okay? So this is the rule. Make sure you guys look back at your notes as you're working on the Math Excel homework or assignment for today. This is really important that you guys write this down and look back at your notes. Okay, so I'm going to use a pencil for this part. So the rule is if your trinomial is a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, it factors to be a plus b squared. I'm going to show that right here. So what we check for are the first and last terms perfect squares. X squared is a perfect square. 16 is a perfect square. The square root of 16 is 4. So what I usually do, write that down first, and then I just square root, and I write the square root is 4, and the square root of x squared is x. To check the middle term, it should be 2 times the first and last terms. So it'd be 2 times x times 4. So that would be 2 times 4 is 8x, and that is the middle term, x plus 4 squared. So again, the first term is the first squared. The last term is the second one squared. 4 squared is 16. The middle is 2 times x times 4. 2 times 4 is 8 with the x. So that is how you factor it. Very easy with the shortcut. You could still factor like how we learned last week, where you think what times what is 16 that adds to give 8? Well, 4 times 4 is 16 and it adds to give 8. Right? The other kind might have a minus in the middle term, a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. The only difference is when it factors, you have a minus b squared. So here is an example. So check and see, can you square root the first term? 4n squared, the square root is, the square root of 4 is 2. This is like scratch work. You don't have to do this, and I usually do it in my head, but I'm showing you guys. So, and then the square root of n squared is n. So 2n times 2n is 4n squared. The square root of 9 is 3. So if I multiply them together and times it by 2, does it equal 12? 3 times 2n is 6n. 6n times 2 is 12. So I'm checking, is the first and last term a perfect square? Is the middle term 2 times the first and last terms? So yes, it is. The easy thing is once you've figured it all out, I know to put my minus sign in the middle. You always set up with parentheses and squared. Don't forget that little 2, that makes a big difference. Then you already know the square root of 4n squared is 2n, and that's what goes first. And then the square root of 9 is 3. All right, so there's a couple examples of how to do that. All right, so here's some practice. So I'm going to just keep showing you what to do basically. So whenever you have a trinomial and you're noticing, hey, the first and last terms are perfect squares, I can square root it. Go ahead and just square root it and think about what it equals, x and 3. Think about it, is 2 times 3x 6x? And yes, it is. If it is, then you can just write x plus 3 squared. And if you're not sure, if you're ever not sure, you can always multiply it out, write the binomial twice, do FOIL, x squared plus 3x plus 3x plus 9. The 3x plus 3x does give us 6x. So that does check out. So you can always check your answers by multiplying it out. All right, next one. So again, check the first and last. They are both perfect squares. Square root x squared, that equals x. Square root 49, that equals 7. If you multiply them together and multiply by 2, does that give 14? And yes, it does. 7 times x times 2 is 14x. But I'm noticing that it does have a minus sign, so I have to write x minus 7 squared. All right, the next one. So sometimes it's a little confusing when you have a coefficient in front of the r squared term, but don't get intimidated by it. Just work with it. I just square root it, and I think, what's the square root of 4? That's 2. The square root of r squared is r. And then for the last term, the square root of 81 is 9. So I think 9 times 2 is 18. So 18r times 18 by 2, that is 36. So that means it is a perfect square trinomial. I just have to write it as a binomial squared. So I write 2r. My middle sign is a plus, so keep that sign. And then 2r plus 9. If you're not sure about this, I would just recommend multiply it out when you're done. Write that twice, multiply it out, and you'll see that it does work out. All right, here is the next part. So we're learning 2 different types of special cases today. Pause if you need to. I'm going to move this up. I'll show those examples still. Okay, so this is going to be kind of a lot. So pause if you need to. Okay. So we are going to be factoring a difference of 2 squares. So write it down, pause whenever you feel like you need to. What you're going to see, we've done this where you multiply a product of a sum and difference. So this should be very familiar. We're just doing backwards. Oops, I just noticed that was open. Okay. So there we go. Factoring a difference of 2 squares. Difference of 2 squares. Difference means subtract 2 squares. Let's go through this first, actually. I want you to list down all the perfect squares from 1 squared to 12 squared so that you can easily identify them. And if you're not sure about them, you can look back at these notes and see. Okay, so 1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. 3 squared is 9. And again, squared means you multiply it times itself. 4 squared is 4 times 4, 16. 5 squared, 5 times 5, 25. And then I made my other row right here, or column. 6 squared is 36. 7 squared, 49. 8 squared is 64. 9 squared is 81. 10 squared is 100. 11 squared is 121, and then 12 squared is 144. So you need to be very familiar with these and know right away, like if you see 81, you should think 9. If you see 49, you should be thinking 7. If you see 9, think 3. Okay, so we're thinking of the perfect square, and then square rooting them is going to the left like that to see what squared is that number. All right, so back to the notes part. Here's the rule. So again, look back at your notes to see the rule. Look back as you're doing Math Excel, or if we do a Kahoot or something, or if, just review your notes so you can look back at it. The rule is a squared minus b squared. We'll have a difference of 2 squares, and that equals a product of a sum and difference. So square root the a, square root the b, and then you write a plus b in parentheses times a minus b in parentheses. So it's similar to what I was just showing you in the trinomials. You just square root each one of them. And then you always set it up, one with a plus sign, one with a minus sign. It doesn't matter if the minus comes first or if the plus comes first. So you could set it up either way. So for the first one, I just have to square root x squared, which is x and x. Square root 64. I can look at this if I need to. Find 64, it's 8. Don't write the squared though, it's just 8. So x plus 8 times x minus 8 equals x squared minus 64. So remember, this was a shortcut that we learned for multiplying. Now we're going backwards and we're factoring. All right, same thing with the next one. Square root the first term, that would be 5x. Square root the second term, that would be 6. So I write 5x minus 6 and 5x plus 6. So you can see the first times the first gives us 25x squared. The last times the last gives us minus 36. The two middle terms, if you multiplied it out, they would cancel. So that's the examples. And now we're going to go ahead and practice. So write down the practice problems, pause whenever you need to. And I'm looking ahead at the rule. It's always going to be 2 parentheses, 1 plus, 1 minus. I'm just going to start setting up the answers. V plus, V minus. S plus, S minus. And then W plus, W minus. And again, it doesn't matter if you write the minus first. It's the same thing. It's the commutative property of multiplication. All right, so I already square rooted the variables. It's really easy. If you have a v squared, it's a v. A s squared, it's an s. A w squared, it's a w, okay? But now you have to think of 100. If you need to look at this chart, 100 square root is 10. So I just have to write 10. 16, you find it over here, it would be 4. If you don't know already, you can always use these numbers. 144, that would be 12. And it's that easy. So that's why we use this, this rule. It helps us. It's pretty fast and easy. And you can always check your answer by multiplying. Let me just show one of them. I'll show the last one. So if you multiply it out, and let's do FOIL. You do first is w squared. Outside is minus 12w. Inside is plus 12w. And last is minus 144. The two middle terms, they're the same, but one is minus, one is plus. They cancel out. And so you are just left with w squared minus 144. So that's how you can check your answer. All right, last thing, try these. Try this, factor. So number 1 and number 2 are like the first kind, the one that I have up above in purple. They're perfect square trinomials. See how they're 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3? They're trinomials. Then the second two, they're the ones just right here in green. They are factoring a difference of 2 squares. So use your notes, try to do these, and meet back in class. Also, remember to finish your notes today by writing your 1, 2, 3 questions on the left and a summary of at least 3 sentences summarizing your notes. When you do take a picture of your notes, make sure it's clear and that I can read it, and that you have all of these problems worked out, including the warm-up and your questions and summary. And then you turn it in to Google Classroom.